Today we have a crazy revenge story all over a Mustang. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my revenge after 10 years was still worth it. There are some things that we only tend to realize when we approach a certain age in life. Things that normally would seem unfathomable at a younger age, but even more reasonable as we grow. And also, there are some situations where we're meant to overlook some things, basically move on from certain things and events. And normally I would have done so. However, I couldn't let go of the fact that I was treated horribly all those years back, and now the same person gets to have a happily ever after without receiving even the slightest consequence for their action. I had to do something about that. There was no way I was going to sit back and watch that happen. This is the story of how my high school sweetheart basically ridiculed and ruined my life when we were younger, and fast forward a few years after she was getting married and expecting for things to go her way and eventually have a happily ever after, which I couldn't sit for and I had to intervene. Because even after all those years had gone by, I was still the same person they totally messed up. Let's take a trip down memory lane back to the time when I, male 35, had first met my high school sweetheart. Let's call her Julie, female 29, some 10 years ago. This was around the time period where we were both still teenagers. I can't say for sure that what we had was actually real, but what I can say with absolute certainty is the fact that I truly had feelings for her. And these feelings, I'm sure, would have brought about something new between the both of us. Anyways, back then in high school, I was still a grade above her and things were quite literally non-existent between the both of us at the very beginning. This was due to the fact that we both had very different friend groups, and this made or allowed for little to no room for an encounter, or even a conversation to ensue. However, everything soon changed, as we both were coincidentally invited for a party, which was hosted by a friend of ours, and this was regarded as the party of the year, as the host's parents were out of the country and weren't going to be back for quite some time, which meant that we had the entire house to ourselves, and we had the presence of an adult just in case. This also meant that we were free to run wild and quite literally do the things we weren't able to do normally, and also engage in activities we weren't also permitted to engage in. I don't mean this in the sense that we were engaging in any illegal activity of any kind, but then this was just our way of getting to let loose. And I almost forgot, but attendance was strictly by invitation, which made it all the more worth it as only the people that were considered party freaks were invited, and it was held just once a year. I guess you can get the general idea as to how high profile and chic the party was regarded at the time. Anyways, I never would have thought it possible that I would get invited to said party, as this was one of the most, if not the most exclusive parties of the year, hosted by students by the way, and I was privy to have gotten an invitation for this party courtesy of my best friend Brad, who was friends with the girlfriends of the host, and some way, somehow, I was able to get an invitation. I definitely didn't know what to expect, but the one thing I had in mind before going for the party was the fact that I was definitely going to have the time of my life. Little did I know that quite literally every single person that was present at the party that day was already acquainted with each other outside of the party, and it was quite easy for everyone to get together. As for me, this being my very first party experience ever, I had not the faintest idea as to what exactly it was that I wanted to do, or rather was supposed to do. The only thing I knew at the time was just to get some drink, refills, and some more. While every other person was busy having the time of their lives, I found it quite difficult to even enjoy my drink. Suddenly, I started to feel uncomfortable. Not physically, but then I just didn't feel like I fit in that setting anymore. And just as I was about to resolve myself and take myself back to my parents' house, that was when I caught sight of one of the most exceptionally looking and visually stunning ladies I had ever seen. At the time, it felt like there was no other person in the world other than the two of us. I felt this way as we both locked eyes for a few minutes. I know how it might sound, but then she was definitely into me. I mean, we maintained eye contact at a reasonable distance for quite some time. And this was even when the whole party went crazy when the host came up and all. We just locked eyes with each other, and then I finally decided on taking the initiative and walking up to her. I was already expecting things to go awry, and not even in the slightest smoothly, but then again, while I was walking towards her, the only thing in my mind was to just start a conversation with her, as I felt that things would just pick up from there. And just like I predicted, she was playing hard to get initially, and I just felt like this was all part of the little game that we both were engaging ourselves in. but later on, she was quite receptive. We exchanged pleasantries first, before we went on to introduce one another. We didn't talk for long, as the atmosphere of the entire party was not suitable for the both of us to engage in actual convo, and so I asked her outside so that we may continue from then on, and she was open to that too. We went outside, away from the entire party, and we had quite a lengthy and in-depth conversation, mostly about each other and the separate independent things that brought the both of us to that party. And it was from there that I got to realize that she was also in the same shoe as I was. She was invited coincidentally by the same person that invited me too. And as we shared that in common, seeing as we were the only ones that seemed quite left out of the party, we decided to take the party elsewhere. We both went out of the party to somewhere else where we could enjoy the night better. And not to say that we did anything immoral, but then we both had quite an enjoyable night that day. Right before she left, I made sure to get her contact information, as I really wanted to keep in touch with her, and she was totally open to that, as she stated that she found my company quite enjoyable that night and was looking forward to other nights and other meetings like the one we had. This really made me happy, and I was glad that for once, I was finally lucky to have met someone that truly shared a large majority of the beliefs and thoughts that I had. Anyways, right after that day, when we exchanged contact information, we had been in touch with each other for quite some time. And after almost 2 whole months, we both had become so close with each other, not to the extent where we might have known each other for ages and all, but then we had a certain level of closeness and intimacy between us. I just couldn't explain it with words, and I guess this was due to the fact that she was quite literally the only person that truly understood my perspective on things, and I truly understood hers. It felt like we were made for each other at some point, and at some point in our lives, I found that I was beginning to feel some kind of way for and about her, and I got to realize that the feelings that I was developing were feelings of strong affection. And it didn't seem like there was anything I could have done except to come out with my true feelings, as she was giving off similar energy to mine. I just felt that she would be feeling the same way as I was, and thankfully she was, as I would just ultimately make a fool out of myself and ruin a perfect friendship if she didn't. And so, just like that, we both had gotten used to each other, and things were progressing quite smoothly for the both of us. Even when we were both back in the school setting, even though we couldn't always be with each other as much as we wanted, we always found ways to spend time with each other. And this was really all that mattered at the time. I found out what kind of person she truly was and the lengths she would go to in order to make sure that she always got what she wanted, albeit ensuring that she was always on top of every situation. This was initially something I found out that I could put up with because I honestly thought it was a girl thing. But I later came to realize that this was not only a girl thing, or rather a girl problem, but a her problem. Almost a year had gone by since we were together. Practically the entire school already knew about our relationship with each other. We were even named Couple of the Month one time on the month of Valentine's. And then something happened. While we were having some alone time, she tried to get me down on her, ultimately leading us to go to base 2, and this was something I wasn't ready for at all, not even in the slightest. And I tried to reason with her, but I guess on this day she was not having it. She got furious with me, got herself dressed, and stormed out. I couldn't figure out why and just thought she needed a break, until I stepped out and saw everyone staring disgustedly at me. I didn't know why until the principal came to get me and started reprimanding me right then and there. I was still dumbfounded until I saw her come out from behind the principal, and he stated that she claimed that I tried to force myself on her. Everything became hazy. I couldn't understand what was happening. But basically, he came to call me into his office so as to invite my parents in, as he wanted me to relinquish my studentship and head on to another school, seeing as these were the terms and conditions her parents gave in order to not press charges. When my parents came in, they had no choice but to give in to his suggestion, even though they knew that I didn't really do it. But anyways, just like that, my entire life was tainted, stained, and ruined by this girl. I had vowed to make her feel how I felt that day. Now, fast forward to the present day, I saw a post notification from a friend of mine I still kept in touch with back then in school, and it was a wedding post. And you can already guess who was there. She was looking so happy and joyous that it brought back the pain I felt, and I sought to get my revenge finally. even though I'd almost forgotten about it. I had to get my revenge. For my sanity, I looked for spicy things in her husband's closet, and I found quite a lot. Most of which I guess were kept hidden for the sake of their marriage. And the only thing I did was to get a package with everything that I had just found and wrapped it up as the perfect wedding present for the newlywed couple, and watch as the drama unfolds. And I put a side note with my picture from back in high school so she knows who sent it. Surely, soon after, she got divorced about 3 months after getting married to him, and it seems like things are going to remain that way for a really long time. So, did OP just kind of casually gloss over the fact that they broke into somebody's house and then started looking through their closet trying to find actual skeletons in said closet? And also, like, what can you find in somebody's closet that you can put in a box, mailed to the spouse, and they're actually so surprised and distraught about it that they just divorce them 3 months into the marriage? I'm guessing OP's trying to be vague to try to protect themselves or to not be identifiable, but if that was the case, if somebody had this happen to them and they heard this story, I feel like it's still pretty identifiable. That said, our next story is how I got back at a classmate that tried to sabotage me. In my first year of college, I met Anne, not real name. We were roommates both in the same year, and coincidentally, we both had law as our major. My parents were thrilled to have us living together because, iron sharpens iron, and we were both irons in our own right. We both were whiz kids in our respective high schools, so I was genuinely happy to meet another iron. Unbeknownst to me, my roommate and friend had other plans. We may both be excellent students, but she was nothing like me. I wanted someone I could rub minds with, someone who was just as interested in learning, a nerdy but fun person, who operated from a place of envy and competitiveness. In high school, I was the best literature and history student, but that never got in the way of being friends with popular people or even being popular. I enjoyed learning and loved being nerdy or whatever, but I also had a good relationship with my teachers and most of my classmates. I didn't feel like I was superior to them and never looked down on them. My roommate, on the other hand, from our earliest conversations felt superior to her classmates. She was brilliant, and she always said that they were the real losers. She also talked about how in years, most popular people will no longer be popular and will become nobodies. I waved her air of superiority off as anger. I just assumed that she was angry because she was bullied or harassed by them. We all know how mean high schoolers can be anyway. One of our professors was a well-known lawyer in the country. His father was a prominent lawyer and owned a law firm. Their law firm was one of the top law firms in the country, and even new lawyers try to intern there. The firm would never employ a new wig just to have the firm's name on their CV. Every year, the professor allows his best student to intern at his father's law firm. The professor decided who the best students were and judged based on students' performance and outspokenness in his class. Naturally, like most of his students, I wanted to intern at the law firm too, but I wasn't going to push anyone under the bus to get it. I was going to work to get his attention and earn his interest. I was also okay with not getting it. I just wanted to try and see what the outcome would be. Plus, my grades were good enough to get me an internship elsewhere anyway. My roommate, on the other hand, saw an opportunity to prove that she was more brilliant than me. She did nearly everything to put me down before the professor. Interestingly, I didn't even notice what she was doing until it became obvious. On the first day she did that, we happily left our dorm room together and drove to class. We even had a friendly conversation in the car. When we were in class, the professor asked a question, and I answered. Anne immediately tackled me. I was taken aback by her response to a simple answer to the question my professor asked. The professor entertained and listened to both of our arguments, and dismissed them, saying they were the same. All through that class and even after in the dorm room, Anne was quiet, which was unlike her because she talked a lot. The next time she did that in class, the professor told her that her argument was simply a repetition of what I just said. She then told him that she raised her hands first, but somehow he chose me to speak instead of her. He got irritated and asked her if there was something she'd like to say. She apologized and sat down. Later that day, she told me that the professor was being mean to her. I thought she was being ridiculous, but we were friends and I didn't want to say that outrightly, so I told her that he was probably not in a good mood. My friend then called her mom and told her that her professor was ignoring her on purpose. Even after that event, I still did not think it was about me. I just felt my friend was desperate for attention and secretly thought arguing with me in class to get the professor's attention was kind of pathetic. She stopped arguing with me in class, but I also noticed that she avoided sitting with me in class too. I ignored all this because I still did not think it was about me. It wasn't until it became personal that I knew. Our professor gave us a hypothetical case to study and argue for and against. The case was printed on a sheet of paper that he had passed around, and we were to take it home with us and discuss our arguments the next morning when the next class would be held. I never studied during the day in college, and even in high school, that was why I hardly ever partied at night. I could only study at night. That was the only time I could even think properly. I always had all the fun in the day. That evening, I noticed that Anne constantly stole glances at me. I still didn't understand why, but I also didn't want to ask. Mostly because I'd just used a skincare product the week before and my skin was purging badly. I just thought she was looking at the ghastly acne on my face. After eating that evening, I decided to take a long nap. I was going to stay up at night to study the case anyway, so I needed all the rest I could get. When I woke up, my roommate was all dressed and ready to go to the library. She asked if I wanted to come along, and I declined. She already knew that I only went to the library during the day, and I did that because it was quiet in the library. Since it was mostly quiet in the night too, I preferred to read in my room at night. She left quickly. I planned to start studying when it was 11 p.m., but I woke up past 9. I decided to go back to sleep since I still had more time. When I finally got up and was at my study table, I could not find my paper, the one that was passed around in class and contained the cases. I remember keeping it in the middle of the pages of one of my notebooks when I returned from class with Anne. I looked everywhere in the room. I started to call my roommate to ask if she'd seen it, but her phone rang in the room. She didn't take her phone with her to the library. That night, after searching thoroughly, I decided to just study a bit and go to bed. I was going to ask for Anne's copy when she returned past midnight and jotted down my arguments. Unfortunately, Anne did not return that night. I didn't see her until the next morning. I was trying to explain the strange occurrence to her when the professor walked in. I noticed that she didn't walk away as usual. She sat just beside me. The professor wanted us all to read out arguments, but he changed his mind and said people could copy the arguments of one another. He asked that we walk up with our jottings instead and read the arguments out to him. Anne was the first offer to read hers to him, while others went to him to read theirs. I hurriedly read through Anne's paper and came up with weak arguments. I didn't have time to think, so the argument was weak and maybe even lame. When I got to him and showed him my paper, he looked genuinely surprised and asked if I'd come up with my argument in my sleep. I told him I wasn't feeling well and that was why I couldn't think properly. That night, I told Anne about what the professor said, and I can swear I saw her nearly break into a smile. She seemed pleased. It was at that point that I started to suspect her. Why did she leave her phone in the room that night? And where did she spend the night? It must have been carefully planned since she came to class from wherever she passed the night and was wearing something different from what she wore to the library. I also remembered that when I was reading her paper, I noticed that she wrote her name in the middle. It made sense to me, but I needed proof. The proof came when she left the room again that night. I opened the totes bag she took to the library the day before, and there it was. My paper, crisply folded and kept in the middle of her dictionary. I decided to pretend that nothing had happened, but I was a petty queen. There was no way I was going to let her get away with it. After 4 weeks of different tests, the professor invited us for an interview with one of the lawyers at his dad's law firm. 4 of us were to be interviewed, and Anne, in her usual manner, started scheming on how to be the chosen one. When I saw how much she was preparing for it, I joked that she behaved as though she was preparing for a presidential election. She then said if she didn't get the spot, she might harm herself. I laughed and said it wasn't that serious. I just didn't want it to seem like I was trying as hard. I then told her that the professor seemed to like me and how I think, and that I'd hoped he'd put in a good word for me. She ignored me. On the morning of the interview, I told her I was going to have breakfast with a guy I just met before the interview. It was obvious that she thought that was a stupid idea, but she didn't discourage me, she just nodded. What she did not know was that the day before that day, I had taken both her toothbrushes and kept them hidden. I also took the pants from the clothes she prepared and gave them to the neighbor to keep for me. I didn't take the entire clothing because then she may notice early that it was missing and raise the alarm. I also took her car keys and her keys to the room. She had her towel wrapped around her body and was ready to go to the bathroom when I left the room. I locked the door and drove her car to the professor's office for the interview. Luckily for me and my revenge, the interviewer was already at the office and was talking to the first student. I went in next and was on my best behavior. The third person came in and Anne still wasn't around. The interviewer got mad and announced that he'd decided on the right person for the internship. Some 30 minutes after we left, Anne came in wearing something else, her hair looked crazy, and she was sweating. She tried to tell the professor what I'd done, but he refused to listen. He told her that the internship opportunity was a privilege, not a right, and that he had the right to refuse to pay any attention to her excuse. Yes, she reported me to the school authority, but I blatantly denied it. I lied that I'd asked to borrow her car, and she agreed, and that she was going to ride with another girl in the dorm room. When she tried to attack me later in her room, I told her that I knew what she did to my paper. Luckily, the session had ended and we were leaving the dorm anyway. That was how I dealt with someone who thought she could be cunning. The roommate may not realize it now, but they've only got themselves to blame for this whole thing happening. I mean, how can they go and try to do some backstabbing thing and then turn around and act shocked when OP does the same to them? I mean, you're both smart, right? Iron sharpens iron. It's like the most obvious thing that's going to happen. I guess that's what happens when you think everybody else is below you. You might be a bit careless. That said, our next story is when my careless brother broke our Mustang and lied about it. Growing up in our quiet suburban neighborhood, Dave and I were like oil and water. I, Alex, was the responsible one, always striving for fairness. Dave, on the other hand, oozed entitlement from day one. He thought the world was his personal vending machine dispensing whatever he desired. This attitude became especially clear when it came to our prized possession, a vintage Mustang passed down from Dad. That car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a time capsule of family memories. Every nick and scratch whispered stories of shared adventures and laughter with Dave, but for him, it was a shiny trophy, a way to strut and preen in front of his friends. The tension simmered for years. Dave's entitled grabs for the Mustang grew bolder, returning it a mess without a second thought. He even expected a pat on the back for his borrowing. My ideas for respect bounced off him like ping pong balls. He just brushed me off with a careless laugh, leaving me fuming silently. It felt like the frustration was building a dam inside me, and one day, it was bound to burst. The crash was the final straw. It was a Friday night, the air thick with the promise of a wild weekend. Dave, ever the charmer, waltzed in with a group of his friends, their boisterous laughter echoing through the house. Despite the late hour, a familiar glint in his eyes told me he had something planned. My heart sank. That glint usually meant trouble, and trouble often came wrapped with the need to borrow the Mustang. As expected, Dave announced he was borrowing the car for a quick spin. My protests were drowned out by his friends' raucous approval. Defeated, I watched them peel out of the driveway, the roar of the engine fading into the distance. Hours ticked by, each one etching worry lines deeper onto my forehead. Finally, the pre-dawn quiet was shattered by a jarring ring. The phone. A choked voice on the other end identified himself as a police officer, his words a gut punch. "There's been an accident involving a vintage Mustang." Rushing to the scene, I was greeted by a mangled mess of metal. Our beloved Mustang crumpled beyond recognition. Relief washed over me momentarily when I saw Dave, shaken but unharmed, but that feeling vanished as details emerged. Dave, ever the irresponsible one, had let a clearly intoxicated friend get behind the wheel. It was this friend, not Dave, who had lost control on a sharp turn, sending the car careening into a ditch. Fury bubbled within me. Not only had Dave blatantly disregarded my wishes, but he had endangered not just himself, but others as well. The pristine Mustang, a symbol of family memories, now lays in ruins, a stark reminder of his reckless actions and the potential for a much worse outcome. The joyride had turned into a nightmare, and the weight of his choices settled heavily on all of us. Still, instead of owning up to it, he started weaving this elaborate story about faulty brakes and a surprise road closure. I knew that car inside and out. Dad kept it in top shape. His lies were as transparent as a cheap plastic bag. But to my horror, no one believed me. The family, always swayed by Dave's charm, swallowed his story whole. It was like I was invisible, screaming into the void. A cold anger, a thirst for justice bubbled up inside of me. This wasn't just about the car, it was about the blatant disregard, the betrayal. This wouldn't stand. Dave might have gotten away with wrecking the Mustang, but I wouldn't let him wreck our entire relationship. Something had to change. Days bled into weeks, and my pleas for the truth felt like whispers swallowed by a thick fog. Witness accounts seemed to corroborate Dave's story, and the physical damage conveniently supported his web of lies. It was like trying to reason with a brick wall. Every attempt to expose the truth only resulted in accusations of me being overdramatic or jealous. The injustice of it all burned a hole in my gut. Little did Dave know, his lies had become gasoline, igniting a fire of determination within me. I wouldn't let him get away with this. The tension between us grew tighter than a guitar string. One day it just snapped. The dam holding back my frustration burst, and accusations flew like sparks. Years of pent-up anger spilled out, a torrent of words aimed at Dave's carefully constructed facade. But he was a master manipulator, even in the face of my outburst. He spun the story around, painting himself as the victim and me as the crazy one. These confrontations became a horrifying new normal, poisoning the air at every family gathering. What were once celebrations became battlegrounds, leaving everyone on edge. The joy had been replaced by a suffocating tension, all thanks to Dave's lies and the family's misplaced trust. I knew something had to give. This couldn't go on. The family was a dead end. Legal avenues seemed just as frustrating. Dave the Weasel somehow managed to dodge every question, every accusation. He would spin tales to the lawyers and insurance adjusters, leaving them with more confusion than clarity. The lack of hard evidence, thanks to the conveniently placed road closure in his story, kept my case teetering on the edge. Isolation gnawed at me. I was fighting a one-man war, and the enemy was winning. Inside, I was a hurricane. Fury at Dave's betrayal mixed with frustration at the system's impotence. All I wanted was fairness, accountability. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, replaying arguments in my head, searching for new angles, new ways to expose his lies. The Mustang, once a symbol of shared memories, now loomed in the driveway, a constant reminder of the shattered trust, the fractured family. But even with every roadblock, every setback, my resolve hardened. The anger, the betrayal, it all fueled a deeper fire within me. This wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about truth, about holding Dave responsible for his actions. He might have thought he'd gotten away with it, but he was wrong. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning, and I wouldn't rest until the truth came out. This fight for justice, it would test everything. The family bonds, my own limits, but I was ready. I had to be. The walls were closing in, but not on me. They were closing in on Dave's carefully constructed web of lies. Legal channels and family pleas were dead ends. It was painfully clear. Justice wouldn't be served on a silver platter. It was time to take matters into my own hands. Fueled by a deep well of determination, I started crafting a meticulous plan. It wasn't about blind rage, it was a game of chess. Every move calculated to expose Dave for who he truly was, without arousing suspicion. But it wasn't enough to just watch. I had to craft situations that would reveal Dave's true character to everyone else. Subtle manipulations, carefully orchestrated scenarios, these would become mirrors reflecting Dave's ugly reality back at the people who blindly believed his facade. The satisfaction wouldn't come from revenge, it would come from shattering the illusion and exposing the truth to the light of day. This wasn't just about the car anymore, this was about dismantling Dave's act, about reclaiming my family, and most importantly, reclaiming my own truth. The game was on. Revenge wasn't the sole motivator, though I did want to see him pay. It was really truth and accountability I craved. Each action I took walked a tightrope. Ethical enough to avoid crossing a moral line, yet effective enough to rip the mask off Dave's face. As I meticulously placed each piece of evidence, a quiet confidence bloomed within me. The powerlessness I once felt began to recede, replaced by a steely resolve. This wasn't just about exposing Dave, it was about years of his wicked acts left unchecked. My family was fractured, a gaping wound festering with lies. This plan, it was my scalpel, ready to excise the deceit and hopefully pave the way for healing. The stage was set and the evidence gathered. With a deep breath, I initiated my revenge plan. Each move calculated, precise, and fueled by a burning desire for justice. My first line of attack was camouflage. Tiny cameras, disguised as everyday objects, sprouted throughout the house and car. They became my silent army, documenting Dave's every move, casual chats, heated arguments, everything. No moment was safe from their watchful eyes. The footage I collected was a gold mine. Using this evidence, I became a puppeteer of sorts. I orchestrated seemingly casual encounters, subtly nudging conversations in a direction that would expose Dave's true self. Maybe it was a friendly chat about car repairs, where his story about the accident would unravel. Or perhaps it would be a situation where his usual manipulative tactics would come to light in front of our unsuspecting family and friends. Every interaction became a chance to showcase Dave's web of lies, and I wouldn't miss a single beat. But my plan wasn't built solely on personal revelations. I remembered some legal tidbits I'd picked up over the years, and I started digging deeper. Legal loopholes, consultations with savvy professionals. I explored every avenue to put the screws on Dave. He may have thought that he'd outsmarted everyone, but the legal system had its own ways of extracting the truth. With each piece of evidence, with each legal pressure point, the walls around Dave's carefully constructed lie began to crumble. The stage was set for the final act. Dave felt the walls closing in. He knew I was getting close to exposing his lies, and he panicked. He started whispering to our friends and family, trying to make them doubt me. He said I was crazy, that I was making things up just to get back at him. His charm worked on a lot of people, and it was frustrating to see them believing him over me. The legal stuff turned into a huge fight. We both had lawyers, and they argued back and forth about the evidence and the laws. It felt like a never-ending tug of war. Even my own family started taking sides. Some believed me, but others believed Dave because they liked him better. It tore our family apart. All this fighting was taking a toll on me. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing anymore. Was revenge worth all this pain? I wasn't sleeping. I was constantly second-guessing myself, and it felt like I was losing myself in the process. Every setback felt like a punch to the gut, but somehow I kept going. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was a need for justice, but I just couldn't let Dave win. It felt like everything was on the line. My sanity, my family, everything. Finally, it all came to a head. Dave faced the consequences of his actions, both legal and personal. He realized how much he had hurt everyone, and he started to regret what he'd done. For me, the relief was mixed with sadness. I was glad the truth came out, but it came at a cost. My relationships were damaged and I wasn't sure how to fix them. But slowly, things started to change. We started talking again. Honestly, this time, it wasn't easy, but we were at least trying. The car, that symbol of our broken past, became a symbol of our hope for the future. We started working on it together, piece by piece. It was a long road ahead, but at least we were walking it together. This whole ordeal wasn't what I expected. It wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about learning to forgive, learning to heal, and learning what family truly means. It wasn't a clean ending, but it was a beginning of a new chapter for all of us. So I'm just wondering what the actual fallout was that OP didn't detail. I'm assuming, there was probably some kind of settlement, maybe a reduced settlement with the promise that he's going to help OP try to rebuild the vehicle, which, let's be real, after they flipped and totaled that vintage Mustang is probably never actually going to get back to working condition, or at least good-looking condition. But hey, I suppose at least you've got a project to work on, and your relationship isn't totally ruined, I hope, going forward. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.